The Ixtal Nexus was the greatest power in our galaxy. Our empire stretched across 1,000 stars. Our fleets were undefeated. Our technology was supreme. For centuries, we had absorbed other species into our perfect order. They joined us willingly, or they were removed. It was the way of things. We first noticed humanity from a great distance. Our long-range sensors listened to their world. We heard the chaos of their many nations. We saw the flashes of their primitive wars. They used crude projectiles and simple energy weapons. They even split the atom for destruction. It was a messy, violent display. We watched them finally unite. They formed a single global government. They built their first starships. They began to explore their local solar system. They were like children taking their first steps. The High Synod of the Nexus debated what to do with them. Some of us were cautious. The humans showed a fierce spirit. But the militant caste argued forcefully. They said humanity was too emotional. They were too unpredictable. They were a risk to the Nexus's perfect stability. The militant caste won the debate. The decision was made. Humanity would be given a choice. They could join the Nexus and submit to our rule, or they would be erased. It was a simple, clean solution. We had done this many times before. We expected no different result. A single emissary ship was dispatched to Earth. It carried our ultimatum. We were sure the humans would see the logic of our superiority. We were sure they would bow. Our emissary ship descended to the human homeworld. It did not ask for permission to land. It went straight to the center of their largest city. The emissary was a high-ranking member of the Logic caste. His name was Vorlon. He was tall and calm. His mind was a perfect machine of reason. He stood before the human leaders. He did not see them as equals. He saw them as subjects. He delivered our terms. His voice was flat and without emotion. He told them their independence was over. They would give us all their technology. They would disband their military forces. They would provide us with resources and workers. In return, they would be allowed to live under our protection. It was a generous offer. For a primitive species, it was more than they deserved. The human leaders listened in silence. They did not look afraid. They did not look angry. This was unusual. Most species begged or threatened at this point. These humans just watched. When Vorlon finished, a single human female stepped forward. She was their head diplomat. She looked Vorlon directly in his eyes. She did not plead. She asked a question. "Why?" she said. "Why does the great Ixtal Nexus need our little world? You have so much already. What is the purpose of taking more?" Vorlon was silent for a moment. The question was illogical. The purpose was obvious. Power was its own purpose. To be strong was to rule. That was the natural order. He told her this. The human woman shook her head slowly. "You did not answer the question," she said. "You have only described a process. You have not told us the final goal." Vorlon felt a flicker of irritation. These creatures were irrational. He gave them the final part of the message. "You have one planetary day to decide," he said. "Our fleet is already on its way. If you refuse, you will be destroyed." He turned and left. He was confident they would surrender. All species did when faced with true power.
The Ixtal Armada moved through the void. It was a glorious sight. 1,000 warships. They flew in perfect formation. Their silver hulls shone in the starlight. They were the sharp end of the Nexus's will. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Kalen felt a sense of purpose. He had done this many times. He would arrive. He would issue his demand. The primitive species would see his power and surrender. Sometimes they would fire a few pathetic shots first. It never mattered. His victory was always certain. His senses tracked towards the human solar system. He saw their orbital stations. He saw their small, clumsy ships. It was exactly as he expected. A young, weak civilization. He opened a channel on all frequencies. His voice echoed across human space. "People of Earth," he said, "your time is up. The Nexus has given its judgment. Surrender now and live. Fight, and you will be wiped from history. Make your choice." He leaned back, waiting for the panic. He expected to hear screams. He expected to see their ship scramble in a hopeless defense. But the channel remained silent. There was no panic. There was no answer at all. This was new. This was strange. A feeling of unease touched his mind. Why were they not afraid? Then a new signal cut into his comm. The voice was calm and clear. It held no fear. "Admiral Kalen," the voice said, "this is Curator Aris of the human vessel Memento Mori. We reject your demand for surrender. We also strongly advise you to power down your weapons. You are making a very large mistake." Admiral Kalen was stunned. He had never received a response like that. It was not defiance. It was a warning given with the tone of a teacher correcting a child. His officers on the bridge looked at him, confused. He felt his anger rise. How dare they? He would show them their mistake. He ordered his fleet to target the source of the transmission. His sensors focused on a point of space between Mars and Jupiter. Space itself seemed to twist. A ship dropped out of warp. It was not like any ship he had ever seen. It was not sleek or beautiful. It was huge and blocky. It was all hard angles and thick, layered armor. It looked less like a ship and more like a flying fortress. This was the Memento Mori. Admiral Kalen's scanner swept over it. The data made no sense. The power output was massive, but it did not match any known weapon signature. The armor was a bizarre composite designed to absorb insane amounts of punishment. This was a ship built to be hit, to survive, not to fight. The human ship just hung there in the dark. It did not move. It did not power up weapons. It simply waited. Admiral Kalen's unease grew. This was wrong. This was not how this was supposed to happen. He had 1,000 ships. They had one. He had the power of a galactic empire behind him. He would not be intimidated. He gave the order. "All ships," he commanded. "Target the human vessel. Lock all weapons. Prepare to fire on my mark." 1,000 targeting lasers painted the Memento Mori. It still did not move. The silence from the human ship was deafening. It was the most frightening sound Admiral Kalen had ever heard.
Admiral Kalen stared at the human ship. It was a monster of metal. It did not look like it was built for battle. It looked like it was built to endure a catastrophe. He pushed his fear aside. He had the entire Armada. One strange ship could not stop them. He gave the order to fire. The space between the fleets vanished in a storm of light. 1,000 different weapons fired at once. Plasma beams cut through the dark. Missiles streaked forward. The glare was so bright it hurt to look at. The light faded. Admiral Kalen leaned forward. He expected to see nothing. He expected to see dust. But the human ship was still there. Its armor was glowing red in spots. Steam and gas vented from a few places. But it was whole. It was intact. It had taken the full force of his fleet and survived. A low, deep hum started to come from the human ship. It was a sound you felt in your bones. Then the memento mori began to move. It did not rush toward them. It moved slowly. It was like a mountain deciding to walk. It came straight for the center of the Ixtal formation. Admiral Kalen shouted for his fleet to fire again. They unleashed another volley. The results were the same. The human ship's armor flashed. It absorbed the energy. It dissipated the blasts. It was like throwing stones at an ancient cliff. The stones broke. The cliff did not. The memento mori moved forward without slowing. It was now deep inside their formation. The Ixtal ships were forced to scatter around it. It was too big to ignore. It was too strong to hurt. For the first time, Admiral Kalen felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. What were these humans? The memento mori still did not fire a single weapon. Instead, its hull opened up in 100 places. Small pods launched out. They were not missiles. They were drones. They were fast and agile. They swarmed like insects. They flew straight towards the Ixtal ships. They did not aim for the engines or the weapons. They did not try to destroy anything. They landed on the hulls of the ships. They attached themselves to power conduits and sensor arrays. A strange energy pulse would flash from the drone into the ship. Then the Ixtal ship would suddenly go dark. Its lights would die. Its engines would stop. It would become a silent, drifting rock. Ship after ship fell to the drones. A cruiser to the left of the flagship went dark. A destroyer to the right spun slowly, powerless. The humans were not killing them. They were putting them to sleep. They were disarming the entire armada without killing a single soul. Admiral Kalen watched his fleet being taken apart. It was a quiet, methodical disaster. Then the drones came for his flagship. He felt a heavy thud as they latched on. The lights on his bridge flickered. An warning alarm sounded for 1 second, then went silent. The main power was gone. They were on emergency batteries. They were dead in the water. The great Ixtal Armada had been defeated, and the humans had not even fought a battle. They had performed a surgery. Admiral Kalen stood on his dark bridge. His crew looked to him. They were scared. He had no orders to give. They could not move. They could not fight. He made a decision. If he was to be defeated, he would look his enemy in the eye. He gathered a team of his best warriors. They put on their combat armor. They took their plasma rifles. They moved to the airlock that connected to the human ship. They used cutting tools to burn through the outer door. They stepped into the memento mori. They expected to see a warship. They expected to see weapon racks and military order. They were wrong. The corridor was wide and clean. The air was fresh. It smelled like a forest after rain. The walls were not bare metal. They were screens showing views of alien worlds, beautiful deserts, strange oceans, lush jungles. They walked further in. They passed a room filled with rows of plants. It was a garden. They passed another room that was a giant library. Data crystals glittered on shelves. They heard soft music from somewhere. This was not a warship. It was a museum. It was an ark. Admiral Kalen lowered his weapon. His warriors did the same.
They were not in the belly of a monster. They were in a place of peace. This confused them more than any battle could. The Ixtal boarding party moved deeper into the ship. They saw no human soldiers. They saw no crew. The ship seemed to run itself. They finally reached a huge central chamber. The room was circular and dark. In the very center was a tall black pillar. It was made of a smooth stone-like material. It reached all the way to the high ceiling. As Admiral Kalen approached the pillar, it began to glow. Words appeared on its surface. They were names, but they were not human names. They were strange and alien. The Grith of Talon 4, the Songweavers of Lyra, the Crystal Dancers of Kepler's Hope. Next to each name was a date. The dates were all in the past. Admiral Kalen realized what he was looking at. This was a list of the dead, a memorial for extinct species. The names kept scrolling. There were thousands. There were millions. The scale of it was overwhelming. How many worlds had lost their voices? How many stories had ended? The humans were not just saving themselves. They were remembering everyone. A calm voice spoke from behind them. "You begin to see." The Admiral turned. A human man stood there. He was not young. He wore a simple gray uniform. He had no weapon. His eyes were old and sad. "I am the Curator Aris," the man said. "Welcome to the archive. We have been waiting for you." Admiral Kalen stood frozen before the black pillar. The endless scroll of names was a weight on his soul. Each one was a civilization, a people, a history, all gone. The sheer number was a crushing force. It spoke of a universe far more cruel and empty than he had ever imagined. The Ixtal sought to build an empire to last forever, but this wall showed him that forever was a lie. Everything ended. The human, Curator Aris, stood patiently, allowing the horror to settle. "This is the wall of silence," Aris said, his voice soft yet clear in the vast chamber. "Every name you see is a story that was almost lost to the dark, a song that was almost forgotten. We are the ones who remember the songs." Kalen finally found his voice, though it was a strained whisper. "Why? Why would you do this? What possible purpose does it serve to carry this grief with you?" He gestured around the chamber, at the gardens and libraries they had passed. "You fly into battle carrying seeds and music. It is madness." Aris gave a small, sad smile. "Is it? You fly into battle to conquer, to add more resources to your stockpiles, to add more territory to your maps. But to what end, Admiral? Your empire is 1,000 years old. What is its great achievement? What masterpiece of art does it cherish? What symphony does it play for its children? Or is its only achievement simply being bigger?" The question hit Kalen like a physical blow. He had no answer. The Nexus's goal was perpetual growth. It was the only goal. The purpose of that growth was never questioned. It was simply the way. Aris continued, his gaze intense. "You asked us why we fight over territory. We asked you why you seek it. You never answered us with anything but a description of your process. You have forgotten the why. We have not. Our why is on this wall. We fight so that no more names are added. We fight so that someone, somewhere, remembers that the Grith ever existed, that the Songweavers ever sang, that the Ixtal once had poets, before you had only soldiers." Kalen looked from the wall back to Aris. The human's calm resolve was more frightening than any battle fury. This was not an enemy that could be reasoned with or intimidated. How do you threaten someone whose primary purpose is to remember you after you are gone? How do you defeat an ideology built on loss? Curator Aris led the stunned Ixtal boarding party away from the memorial. They walked in silence, their weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. He took them to a different part of the ship, a large observatory with a clear view of the stars. "You came here believing we were the enemy," Aris began, his back to them as he looked out at the glittering void. "You were wrong.
The enemy is not another empire. The enemy is not a rival species. The enemy is the silence. He turned to face Admiral Kalen. The enemy is the heat death of the universe. It is the slow, inevitable cooling of all stars. It is the final darkness that waits for every living thing. It is the great forgetting. He pointed a finger out the viewport. That emptiness is the only true enemy. It is patient. It is relentless. And it always wins in the end. Ares paused, letting the grim truth sink in. Your nexus, Admiral, is not fighting that enemy. You are serving it. Every world you conquer and strip bare is a victory for the silence. Every culture you absorb and erase is a story the darkness has consumed. You are not building a legacy. You are merely adding more kindling to a fire that one day will go out, leaving no trace that it ever burned. Kalen felt the foundations of his entire life cracking. His pride, his duty, his very understanding of power, all of it was being dismantled. "So what is your purpose then?" Kalen asked, his voice hollow. "If the end is certain, why fight it?" "Because the fight itself is the meaning," Ares replied, his voice suddenly passionate, filled with a fire the Ixtal had not seen before. "To resist the dark, even though you know you will lose, to carve our name into the face of oblivion, to shout, 'We were here,' into the endless night. That is the purpose. We are the librarians of the galaxy. We are the keepers of the flame. This ship, the Memento Mori, is not a warship. It is a library, a seed bank, a museum. It is a lifeboat for memory itself. We were not trying to destroy your armada. We were trying to save you from becoming another servant of the silence. We were trying to save your story." He looked at the Ixtal warriors, their stone-like faces now showing confusion and doubt. "Your war, your glorious conquest, is just a faster way to achieve the very nothingness you fear."
Admiral Kalen returned to the bridge of his flagship. The journey back through the Memento Mori felt like a walk through a dream. The gardens, the libraries, the wall of silence, it all played over and over in his mind. His officers looked at him, desperate for orders, for a plan to retaliate. They saw the human ship still just floating there, and they saw a target. Kalen saw something else entirely. He saw a monument. He saw a truth he could not unsee. He activated the fleet-wide comms. His voice was heavy, stripped of all its former arrogance. "All ships of the Ixtal Armada, this is Admiral Kalen. You are to stand down immediately. Power down all remaining weapons and offensive systems. The engagement is over." A wave of shock and protest erupted over the comms. Captains demanded an explanation. They had not been destroyed. They could still rally. They could find a weakness. "No," Kalen said, his tone final and absolute. "There is no weakness to find. We cannot fight this enemy. To fire another shot at that ship is to declare war on memory itself. It is to side with the void. It is to become the very thing we claim to fight against." He looked at the image of the Memento Mori on the main screen. "We have not been defeated by a superior force. We have been corrected. We have been shown that our entire understanding of strength was a childish fantasy. True strength is not the power to destroy. It is the will to preserve. It is the courage to remember. We came here to conquer a potential rival. Instead, we have found the closest thing this galaxy has to a soul, and we were about to try and snuff it out." The comms fell silent. The truth of his words, delivered with such profound defeat, began to sink in across the fleet. The will to fight drained away, replaced by a bewildered shame. They had pointed their guns at a library and called it an enemy. They had tried to burn the last copy of a book they had not even bothered to read. With the Ixtal fleet neutralized and pacified, the Memento Mori began to move. It did not head towards Earth to celebrate a victory. It simply turned, its massive bulk moving with a slow, deliberate grace, and began to journey back into the deep space from which it had come. Its work here was done.
But before it left, it broadcast one final powerful data stream. It was directed solely at the Ixtal fleet. Admiral Kaelan, his spirit broken, but his mind clearer than ever, ordered his communications officer to receive it. "Record it all," he commanded. "This is not a weapon. This is a gift." The data packet was immense. It unpacked itself in their computers, revealing its contents. What they found inside stole the breath from every Ixtal who saw it. It was the complete cultural and historical record of the Ixtal species. But it was not the sanitized, logical history taught by the Nexus. This was the raw, vibrant, chaotic history of their people. There were the epic poems of the first wanderers, lost for 10,000 years. There were the wild, emotional paintings from the Age of Awakening, art that the Logic Cast had later deemed inefficient and purged from the records. There were the complex, haunting musical compositions of their most ancient composers, music that had been replaced by simple, functional harmonies. The humans had not just been preserving other species. They had been preserving the Ixtal from themselves. They had saved the heart of the Ixtal people, the very soul that their own relentless pursuit of order and power had forced them to abandon. The Nexus had made them forget who they were. The humans, their supposed enemies, had just given it back to them. The return of the Ixtal Armada to the heart of the Nexus was not a triumphant homecoming. It was a somber, silent procession. The ships drifted into their docks, their hulls scarred not by weapons fire, but by the subtle, disabling tools of the human drones. Admiral Kaelan stood before the High Synod. The council members were furious. They demanded to know how a single ship had humiliated the greatest fleet in history. They accused Kaelan of cowardice, of treason. Kaelan stood tall. He did not defend his tactics. He did not speak of military failure. He began to tell them a story. He told them of a ship that was not a warship, but a garden. He described the Wall of Silence and the millions of names upon it. He spoke of the human, Curator Eris, and his words about the true enemy, the silence, the great forgetting. The Synod mocked him. They called the humans deceivers, manipulators. They said it was a trick to make the Nexus weak. So Admiral Kaelan showed them the gift. He played the lost song of the first dawn, a melody so beautiful and sad that several of the older Synod members visibly flinched. He displayed the wild, colorful art of the pre-unification artists. He read from the philosophical texts that questioned the very foundation of their empire. The High Synod fell into a deep, profound silence. The evidence was undeniable. The humans had given them back a piece of their own soul, and in doing so, they had proven their entire argument. The Nexus, in its quest for power, had become an agent of the very oblivion it sought to avoid. It had been erasing itself all along. A great debate raged within the Nexus. It was a schism that shook the Empire to its core. The militant caste argued for revenge. They wanted to build bigger weapons, to find the human archive and destroy it, to prove that their way was the only way. But a new movement was born, led by philosophers, artists, and historians who had been inspired by the returned data. They were joined by many, like Admiral Kaelan, who had seen the truth firsthand. They argued that the human way was not one of weakness, but of a different, deeper strength. The Nexus did not disband its military, but its purpose began to shift. They started to build new kinds of ships, not just dreadnoughts, but vessels designed for listening and learning. They established the Grand Archive, a project to record not only their own complete history, but the histories of every species they encountered.
They sent out diplomats whose first question was not, "Will you surrender?" but, "What is your story?" The change was slow, and it was resisted at every turn, but it was unstoppable. The seed of an idea had been planted, the idea that the ultimate victory was not to be the last one standing in a dead galaxy, but to be the one who ensured that the galaxy was never truly dead as long as its stories were remembered. The Ixtal began to understand that they had been fighting the wrong war for centuries.
Years later, a new Ixtal vessel, the Whisper of Dawn, arrived at the agreed-upon coordinates. It was not a warship. It was a research and cultural exchange vessel. Its commander was not an admiral, but a senior curator. After a long wait, the Memento Mori dropped out of warp. It looked exactly as it had before, a silent, stoic mountain in the void. A channel was opened. Curator Aris appeared on the screen, older, his eyes still holding that same deep sadness, but now with a glimmer of something else. Hope. The Ixtal curator spoke. "Curator Aris, the Ixtal Nexus sends greetings. We have come not to fight, but to contribute." The Whisper of Dawn then transmitted a data stream of its own. It contained the complete, updated cultural records of the Ixtal, including all the new art and music created since their change began. It also contained the first ever comprehensive histories of 3 other species, peacefully recorded through diplomacy. It was their first offering to the archive, their first act of remembrance for others. Aris smiled, a genuine warm smile. "It is received, Curator. Welcome to the fight." The 2 ships, one once a conqueror, now a fellow librarian, hung together in the silent dark. They were a small, fragile light against the vast, waiting emptiness, but they were a light. Our Armadas vanished against the humans, not because they were destroyed, but because we were shown we were fighting for the wrong side. We thought the enemy was them. The real enemy was the silence. And the humans, in their infinite wisdom and mercy, taught us how to fight it. They taught us that to remember is to resist, and that as long as one story is told, the war is not lost.